to welcome you all to the 9th International Conference of 11Q Research and Resource Group. We're thrilled to have you all here, and we're thrilled to also to have all the people joining us via live stream. We're excited that technology can do that for us. So we have a lot of people that can join us who can't even be here today. My first conference was in San Diego in 2000 when Braden was only a year old. Zachary wasn't even born yet. And at that conference and each subsequent conference that I've attended, I've had the feeling that I'm a part of a big 11Q family where everyone's accepted and everyone's understood. I've built friendships that have lasted a lifetime with people from all over the world. And every 2 years as the conference rolls around, I feel myself getting so excited to get together with all of you again and to meet new friends too. I feel like we're really coming together as a great big family and a great big 11Q family reunion. And I'm so happy to have all of you as part of that. A lot of work has gone into preparing for this conference, and I just wanted to give a few acknowledgments. First of all, Jessica can't be down here tonight, but Jessica Facchetti is the vice president. She's not feeling great, so she's up in her room. But I just wanted to acknowledge her because she's put a lot of effort into tonight, negotiating stuff at the hotel, getting this whole dinner set up. She's really been a big help behind the scenes, and we really appreciate her. So even though she's not here, let's give her a hand. Another person who can't be here that I want to acknowledge is Rich Siritz. He's our treasurer, and he's done a lot of behind-the-scenes work getting the finances all in order and everything for us to have this tonight. So we appreciate Rich. And we have a conference planning committee that's helped with things from contacting, inviting speakers, writing thank you notes, coming up with topics that will be covered, volunteering to lead sessions. And so I'd like to thank Beth Bromond, Heather Science, Amity Woodford, and Joy Robertson. And we also want to give a big thank you to Brian Woodford for designing and printing the t-shirts for us. They're awesome. And we have a very special thank you for Tim Pellett for volunteering to do the recording and live streaming. It's been a very complicated process getting everything set up. He's spent many hours emailing back and forth to the hotel, being on the phone with the people from the hotel, researching equipment, testing with speakers, and getting all this physically set up for us. It's all way over my head, so we really appreciate him doing that. And I have a little token of appreciation for you, Tim. It's not much, but we want you to know your efforts have not gone unnoticed. Okay, and finally, one person who's remained constant from the very beginning of this organization. His service to us is all simply unmatched. Dr. Grossfeld has been tirelessly dedicated to 11Q research for much of his career. But unlike many researchers, Paul's dedication goes far beyond the science. He's passionately devoted to 11Q children and their families from all over the world. When Braden was first born over 15 years ago, and we were completely lost, facing a diagnosis that even the doctors knew nothing about. It was Paul that stepped in and guided both us and the doctors through treating our son and through the complex medical maze of Jacobson syndrome. And we're not alone in our story. I know many of you have the same story that we do. He's guided countless families through the unknowns of an 11Q diagnosis, providing comfort and hope. His research has given us all the knowledge and power we need to seek the best care for our children. This is the sixth conference that we've worked together on, and I can tell you that it's no simple task. He spends countless hours developing topics, inviting speakers and researchers, arranging the various assessments, coordinating schedules, making sure that this is a valuable experience for everyone here. There's no way that we can adequately thank him, but we do have a little gift of appreciation for him if you'd like to come up.
How much time do you have?
true. You can just come We have a book here that actually does put together from all the Leatherview families. It has pictures and letters from the families too.
Questions and wine is really bad.
He'll be giving his talk from there. Okay, and finally, I don't want them to go unnoticed, but Susan and Stefan, we appreciate them. We know that during conference time, we take a lot of Paul's time, and we want to thank you guys for sharing him with us, and in turn helping us. So. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start having the dinner served, but while the dinner is being served, what we're going to do is go around from table to table and have everyone introduce your family. We have microphones that we'll pass around. Curtis, will you get the microphones? From table to table, so we can all kind of get to know each other a little bit better. Introduce yourself and your family. And also, we have little gift bags that my mom has generously sewn. And there's one for each of the kids here. So we'll be passing out the gift bags while that's going on also. So let's start maybe over here. Okay, start with our table. And then we'll pass it around and we'll get the gift bags passed out.
Hello. My name's Curtis and I have 2 kids with Jacobson syndrome. No, we are the Carrolls. I'm the lesser half of Lindsay. I'm Curtis. And this year we brought 2 of Lindsay's sisters. That's one of them there in the back. That's Kelsey. And the other one up with the really curly hair is Brittany. This is Lindsay's mother, Tamara. And this is Ella, our youngest. Zachary, our 12-year-old with JS. Braden, our 15-year-old with JS. And Megan back there with the long blonde hair is ours as well. And those 2 back there are her cousins.
My name is Linda Brannon. My grandson Tristan Brannon, JS, and my husband Patrick, and Tristan's aunt Kathy.
Hi, I'm actually a study coordinator doing a research project here, but my name's Elizabeth, and I'll be speaking a little bit later. Hi, my name is Leonore, and I'm the mother of Liv and Leia's twins. Liv is a rare mutation of the 11q. Here is my sister also.
Hello, I'm Nigel Barrett from England with my wife Val, daughter Amy who's got Jacobson syndrome, daughter Sophie and her boyfriend Josh. Good to see those of you who we know and love. Hello, there's the F switch. Anyway, we'll see you all around over the week. Here's Ken.
So I'm Ken Paris. I'm one of the speakers tomorrow. And I wanted to thank everyone for inviting me again this year. I did it 2 years ago. And I will talk to everyone tomorrow.
Hello, I'm Jasmine Quinones. This is my son Pedro with GS, grandpa and grandma.
Hi everyone, I'm Liz Wheeler. I'm with Stanford Research and again I'm with, as Elizabeth said, I'm a study coordinator for the Rare Disease Registry and you'll hear from me in a little bit. It's great to be here and I appreciate the invitation to attend.
Hi, my name is Maria Velasco. This is my daughter Bianca with JS, my sister Rocio, and my husband Rigo.
Hello, my name is Keith Charles, and this is my wife Mary. We're here representing our granddaughter Matilda, who unfortunately couldn't come here today. But she was at the conference in Germany, and sends her best wishes to everyone.
Hi, I'm Beth Roberts. This is my husband Rob. This is our daughter Kayla, and this is Steve Reese, who has Jacobson syndrome, and our eldest is the home missionary. Hi, I'm Joy Robertson. My husband Dean Robertson, our son Mackay, who's turning 5 in July. He's very excited about that. And our daughter Kaylani, who's 3 years old and has Jacobson. We're from Seattle, Washington.
Hi, I'm Niranjan. That's my wife Shweta, and that's my daughter Kiara. She's 2.5 years old, and she's a Jacobson. And yeah, we're still jet lagged really, traveling all the way from India. So.
Hi, my name is Svea Lulleborg. We are from Norway. And this is my son Leo, he's 5 years old. My brother, Eivind, and my mother Lisbeth.
Hi, I'm Cindy Davidson. I'm here with my husband Jane, our daughter Riley. And Grandma and Grandpa just flew in and got here in time for the dinner. And we're from St. Cloud, Minnesota.
Hi, come. Riley. Hi, I'm Nola Davis, and this is my foster son Christian Davison, and we're here from Montana. We love the snow to come down here. This is our first time, and we're really excited.
Hi, I'm Willie Asher. I'm Mike Asher, my wife Leslie, and our daughter Alyssa. She was diagnosed with an interstitial deletion about 18 years ago. Right? She passed away, unfortunately, about 16 years ago. We've been coming to the 11Q conference since the first one 15 years ago, and we're honored to be here.
I am Cindy Hallett from the Tim, Vanessa over here, and Lindsay. So Vanessa is 6 and Lindsay is 9. And my mother-in-law, Granny, is Joan Fox.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Christensen. This is my husband Kurt. And our daughter Sydney, who has Jacobson syndrome and definitely wants the microphone. And we have 2 older daughters at home, Claire, who's 12, and Natalie, who's 10, who live in Haywood, Kansas.
Hi, I'm Dawn Carzoli. This is my husband Scott. It's our daughter Sophia, who has Jacobson syndrome, brother Ryan, and her grandma, Amy Cat. We're from Romeo, Michigan.
Good evening, we're the Tuckers. This is Julie Grayson. Sitting here is our little Jacobson girl. My name is Alex, and we come down here from the Willamette Valley of Oregon.
Hi, I'm Heather. This is my son Michael, my daughter Nicole with Jacobson syndrome, and my husband Sean, and we are from New Hampshire. Hi, I'm Annette. We're from San Jose, California. And then Maldonado, our daughter is Korea. She's going to be 26 this summer with Jacobson's. My husband Richard, my nephew Matthew is with us. My nephew Isaiah, my niece Melissa is still upstairs. The poster board ready.
Hi, my name is Eric Pichetti. My husband Peter, we're grandparents. He has Jacobson syndrome, and his brother Richie. And we're originally from New Jersey, now from Nevada.
Hello, I'm Tanya from Minnesota, and this is Alexis. She is one of Seth's PCAs, and she is helping us. And this
Cecilia from 11. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Joe Pereira, and this is Evelyn. She's 5. She has JS. My wife Becky, my baby son Sam, and then Emma and Soraya are over there. Stand up. And then Grandma Lois over there.
Hi, I'm Liz Laddish, my partner Katie Eckler, and we have 2 daughters. This is Ryan, she has an interstitial deletion, and then big sister Charlie. We're from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Hi, I'm Amy Budd. This is my husband, Ryan. This is Tyler. He has an interstitial deletion at 11 He works in Houston,
Hi, I'm Heather Collins, and I'm from New Hampshire, and my mom, Diane Harris, and my dad, Brian Collins, and I have 11 food Jacob syndrome.
Hi, I'm Lana Rush. This is my husband, Ryan Rush. This is Lily. She is 7, and she has Jacobson syndrome. She also has 2 big sisters who are not here. Big sisters are 20 and 17, so we have a big gap. And we are originally from Austin, Texas, but we just moved last week to Katy, Texas, outside of Houston.
Hello, I'm Jeremy Pyle. My daughter Faith is 9.5, has Jacobson syndrome, and my lovely wife Wendy is hepatitis.
Hello, Mike Stanfield. I got 2 boys here, Zion, which is 9, from 11Q, and Caden, which is 7, and my wife Charity. We're from San Marcos, Texas.
I'm Anna T. Woodford. My daughter Kaylee has Jacobson, Raylan, and my husband Brian Woodford, and we're from
All right. We got everyone? Or did we miss anyone? Okay. All right. Well, then, without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Paul. It might be a few minutes.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks again. This is actually a lot of fun to try walking in front of a group of people on crutches after drinking a couple glasses of wine. It's a challenge, but I wanted to say thank you. I think it's just so inspiring to see all of you here. And I'm going to start out by honoring a few of our past conference traditions. I asked you this morning, but there are a lot more people here now, so I'm just curious to get a show of hands. How many of you are here for an 11Q conference for the first time? One hand per family. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, and how many are repeat offenders who have been to more than one conference? 1, 2, 3, 3, not top speakers, sorry, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So it's about a 2-to-1 ratio. So about 1/3 of you are newcomers and 2/3 of you have been here before. So to all of you, again, a big welcome. And I am very excited to be here myself and very relieved. So one of our traditions is to acknowledge the person or the family that's traveled the furthest. And this one was actually a slam dunk. I didn't even have to go to the internet to figure this out. And that family is the Jane family. And so if I could have someone from the Jane family come up here. They traveled 8,818 miles.
Thanks, bud.
A little souvenir from our part of the world.
That's awesome.
I forgot to ask, go ahead. Go ahead and say a few words. What's the time difference?
It's 7:30 a.m. for me. So kind of having my breakfast right now.
Well, you can serve chicken for breakfast. No problem. We're really happy.
I'm vegetarian.
But just kind of as an FYI, we had a pretty close call for second place. As you see here, Ken, actually Virgil Dom, I don't know if he's here yet. Has anybody seen Virgil from Rotterdam, Holland? I actually do have a little thing for him, and I'm going to actually ask Ken maybe if he can come up here on Virgil's behalf. I can't use these for a while, and I know that Virgil is an avid tennis player, so I hope he gets better use out of those than I do.
I will pass
You
them
can
on.
convey those to him.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. You want to come up here? You want to say something? Or you want to help me? Maybe you should listen to your mommy, then you can help me later. Thank you. All right. A close third was actually the family from Norway, the Rubicons, 5,388 miles. The Bear is from England, a very close fourth, just whatever that is, 32 miles. And this is an interesting little trivia question. The furthest known place from San Diego is Mauritius, which is an island off the east coast of Africa, which is 11,500 miles away. And their population is about 1.2 million, so there could be one family statistically or two from Mauritius that could be watching tonight. So if there is one, welcome. All right, I have one more little presentation that I didn't know who was going to earn that until probably today, and that is who went through the most hell trying to get here. I'm open to nominations, but the slam dunk winner, as far as I can tell, in addition to the incredible work that Tim and his family have done to make the live stream a possibility. So Tim, if you can come up here, I have a little something for you as well. I was actually thinking about giving this to you this morning, but I wanted to make sure the live stream went well first, so thank you. All right. So about 3 days before the Germany conference, Nigel told me that they decided that they would like me to give a little historical perspective of Jacobson syndrome. And I quite honestly wasn't too pleased about having to put something together on such short notice. But actually it turned out to be a lot of fun. And so because of that, we thought it might be kind of an interesting experience to share with you this same perspective. So let me make one disclaimer. This is not a scientific assessment. This is just my own kind of personal perspective of sort of the voyage I've been through over the last 15 or so years. So this is the definition of the Odyssey. It's certainly been an odyssey, I think, for all of us in our own way. Any long series of wanderings, especially when filled with notable experiences, hardships, etc. So how many of you know, just out of curiosity, when the first case of Jacobson syndrome was actually reported? Does anybody know what year that was?
73.
Yeah, that's great. So this is the paper that was first reported by Dr. Petrea Jacobsen from Denmark, who passed away a number of years ago. And actually, one of the family members that was reported was a co-author on that paper, the Mikkelsen family. And so, again, it was published in 1973. And this is a recent picture of Johannes, who currently is living in a group home in Denmark. He's, I think, about 2 years older than I am, but I'm not going to tell you how old that means. And he's actually doing pretty well overall, and that's very gratifying. So when I was in my first month of cardiology training here in San Diego, 22 years ago actually, or something like that. Is that right? No, 19 years ago. In July of 1995, I came across Edgar, and I don't know if Edgar is here tonight. Is the Ibarra family here? Maybe not quite yet. So this was Edgar years ago, and I, of course, had never heard anything about Jacobsen syndrome. I was taking care of him because of his heart problems, and I vividly remember in his chart back then there was a copy of that original paper from Dr. Jacobsen, and that sort of was the basis for my becoming interested in Jacobsen syndrome, which turned out to become much more fascinating than I ever imagined. My original interest was because of the association between the congenital heart defects that Edgar has and the fact that it was associated with a chromosomal disorder, which suggested that maybe there could be a way for us to identify what the specific genetic cause was, not just in Jacobsen syndrome, but how that might be applicable to the much broader general population of children with heart defects, which is actually almost 1% of all children that are born. And I'll never forget the first time I presented this to my colleagues here in San Diego. I literally stood up at a chalkboard. I drew a cartoon picture of those bands that you saw Dr. Delacqua show this morning of 11q, and I said, there must be a gene somewhere that's responsible for causing the heart defects, but I was very candid to say that I didn't have a clue how we might be able to find what that gene is, not to mention what it does. So that kind of marked, again, the beginning. That was when I started my research as part of my cardiology training. And as shown here, I really didn't have any more clue for how to pursue this than if I were a monkey. So one of the first things that was very important, though, is quite by just dumb luck, there was one person in the world who had actually published a series of 17 patients with Jacobsen syndrome who happened to be someone right here in San Diego, a PhD geneticist by the name of Dr. Laura Penny. And she had published this series of 17 patients with Jacobsen syndrome, which was really ahead of its time, because what Dr. Penny showed was that there was actually a correlation between the difference in the different deletion sizes and the various different clinical problems that these children had. Even though back then, however many years ago it was, the techniques were pretty primitive. So Dr. Penny at that point had actually already left her job that included studying Jacobsen syndrome to pursue private industry, and I actually just communicated with her about a week or two ago, and she is currently in Costa Rica. But what she did do was hook me up with someone in England by the name of Chris Jones, who is a PhD, who happened to be one of the only people in the world studying the molecular genetics of Jacobsen syndrome. And so in the fall of 1997, Chris and I hooked up and arranged for me to go over there to England to try to figure out how one can approach this problem of taking a chromosomal disorder and dissecting out the genes that might be responsible for any of the various clinical problems and whatnot that the children have. And so in the winter of 1998, I'll always remember that, I spent 3 months in England, in London. I think it rained literally every single day. In fact, it was even a record for London for how many days of rain there were during the time that I was there. And this is Chris, who not surprisingly is sitting there with a glass of beer. Nothing's changed, except for the fact that he's no longer in research. He's actually now working on developing his own line of beer. Shortly after that, during that time that I was in England, I had the opportunity to actually meet a bunch of people that have really helped to shape my sort of career path and sort of the foundation for what we're doing now. So that was my first opportunity to meet at the 11Q meeting in Holland that spring. Some of the first 11Q families that I ever encountered, specifically Annette Van Butel, who was the head of the 11Q group of Europe at that point, the Barretts, who, how many years later did we say this is now? 16 years later, are here, and the Zieglers from Denmark. And that was the first time that I met Teresa Mattina, who will be giving a talk on Wednesday morning. And Teresa was one of only 2 other physicians in the whole world at the time that were actually actively studying Jacobson syndrome. And I remember when I met the Barretts, they were just this, as you know, incredibly warm, loving family, and they actually invited me to come spend a weekend up with them at their countryside home in the Midlands part of England. And so I got to do that. It was quite interesting, quite a fascinating experience. One of the most notable moments of that weekend with the Barretts was getting to meet and getting to know Amy, and we had a nice time that weekend, didn't we, Amy? So during that same spring, I also made a little side trip to Paris, where I met Dr. Remy Favier, who was the only other physician in the world studying some aspects of Jacobson syndrome, specifically the bleeding disorder named after the hospital in Paris that he works at, the Trousseau Hospital, and so that's why it's actually called Paris-Trousseau syndrome. And so this is a picture of Dr. Favier from his office, who sends his apologies for unfortunately having a schedule conflict that didn't permit him to be able to make it. So I think it was on actually my way home from Europe when I made a stop in Virginia and met Melanie Johnson, who at that time was the first president of the 11Q Research and Resource Group. And actually, at that time, there already had been one conference that Melanie organized in Dallas. I'm not sure exactly the year, maybe about 1995, 96. I'm just curious, is there anybody here in the room that went to that meeting? So the Maldonado family. I would love to sit down with you sometime and hear what your comparisons are between that meeting 19 years ago. I'm going to guess it's a little different from this one, but that would be really interesting. And actually, there had been a researcher prior to me who had some involvement with Jacobson syndrome, a PhD investigator by the name of Dr. Glenn Evans. But I was always taught by my parents, if you don't have something nice to say about anybody, then you shouldn't say anything, so I will move right along. So with that inspiration coming back from this very intense 3 months of doing the basic, learning about the research and meeting these families, and then meeting Melanie to learn about the American families, it really inspired us to continue that tradition of having a conference here in the United States for predominantly the American groups, but up to anybody. And so we had our first American-located conference, at least with my involvement, I should say, here in San Diego back in the summer of 1998. And we had about 35 families. Most of the children were Jacobson syndrome children, but we actually had a few with duplications. We haven't had too many more recently, but that turned out to be a really nice conference for me. And one of the things that we did in that conference is we actually came up with sort of a systematic questionnaire to try to basically just learn as much as we can about the syndrome. And just by sitting down and spending time with you guys, families like you, we learn an awful lot. Now, you heard this morning from Dr. Cantor's talk that one of the most historically remarkable milestones, I think, in the history of biology was the actual publication of the first DNA sequence of a human patient or patients, and that was published in 2001. And that was huge because it, for the first time, allowed us to know exactly what are the genes in that region that's missing in your children. And from that, we could really begin to think about the biology of how those genes might contribute to the various problems. So that was 2001, and just as a little bit of an aside, I'm going to embarrass my wife, who's not even looking at the screen right now. So Susan and I got married a year later. Hi, honey. And Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong, was it 2002 when you became president? 2004. Well, I didn't mean that in a bad way to say it seems longer than that, but so I stand to be corrected. In 2004, Lindsay became president, and we all know what an extraordinary job she's done since that time. So I consider that a milestone for this group. In 2004, based on the conferences really that we had already had by that time, we were able to publish our prospective study on by far the largest number of children around the world that we got the chance to study, 110 cases. Remember, I said Laura Petty's paper was on 17 cases, and I believe that year that was published in the journal called the American Journal of Human Molecular Genetics, it was the 5th most read paper of the year from that journal, so that was kind of exciting. And to this day, I think that still is kind of an important reference point that hopefully many of you are showing to your physicians and other caretakers. Now, what's very interesting is when I was in Germany a couple months ago for the conference, I kind of reunited with this family, the Olney family. That's Robin Olney in the pink shirt. And I kind of began to realize that it was actually the Olney family that were the first family way back 10 years earlier who told me that Robin had been actually diagnosed as having autism. And I was actually kind of perplexed and sort of in denial of that because, as I think so many of you can attest to, I was under the impression that, and I'm still under the impression that for the most part, children with Jacobson syndrome are very social and outgoing. In fact, the first sort of neurocognitive person that I hooked up with was a person who studies Williams syndrome, because typically Williams syndrome have this so-called cocktail personality characteristic, and I thought that would be a good fit for studying Jacobson syndrome. So anyway, I kind of put that in the back of my mind, and I'll come back to that point later on. You'll hear much more about that in the next couple of days. So in 2006, Annette Van Beetu stepped down, and Arna Ivan became the president of the 11Q European group, who also did an outstanding job to continue what Annette had started. And then it's hard to believe it's already been 8 years, but I was very fortunate, we are very fortunate to have two world-renowned experts right here in San Diego who have taken such a big interest in your children that many of you have already met. Two PhD psychologists, Dr. Sarah Matson and Dr. Natasha Akshumov, became formally involved, and you're going to hear a lot more about the work that they've done, which very recently has culminated in the publication of a paper in a very highly regarded journal called Genetics and Medicine, so you'll hear all about that on Wednesday. So that was in the spring of 2006, and a few months later came along what I would have to say is my best human genetics project to date, and that was the birth of our son, Stefan, who loves to look at this picture of himself, like most kids do, I guess. There was another very interesting technological advancement that you've heard all about this morning from Dr. Delacola's talk. And prior to this time, really the only way we could sort of assess whether or not there was a deletion was a very qualitative kind of assessment that you heard all about this morning, the karyotype analysis, where they just look at the growth structure of the chromosomes. But that is really a very crude technique when it comes to being able to delineate the specific genes that are involved. And so the array comparative genomic hybridization technology evolved originally from actually studying tumor cells, and by the late 2000s it became really widespread and implemented in the clinical arena as a standard test now in place of karyotype analysis, or looking at the chromosomes for most situations. And then in 2007, we actually came across something that we suspected but really wasn't proven until we could do this array technology, and that is to find a patient that actually had everything that fit the diagnosis of Jacobson syndrome clinically that you know about, but instead of having a deletion that went out to the end of the chromosome, it was actually a deletion within the chromosome that we call an interstitial deletion, and we published that as just a simple case report in 2007, but that actually has been a huge step forward to help us to identify the genes, because let's say if you have a child with a heart defect, if that child has, let's say, a deletion that's 10 megabases in size, that means they're probably missing 150 genes. And it's really, to this day, quite challenging to try to figure out which one out of 150 genes might be the cause. But now with the interstitial deletions, and you'll hear about this more tomorrow and on Wednesday, we can use that information. If you have a child with an interstitial deletion that's within that big region that also has a heart defect, that helps you to narrow down the region. And then that's exactly what we've done to find several of the genes now that we think are involved. And that really led us to identify this gene called the ETS1 gene that I'll talk about tomorrow, that we think is probably responsible for causing most, if not all, of the heart defects in your children. And using a similar approach, we published a paper implicating at least 2 genes that probably contribute to the cognitive and potentially behavioral problems that occur as well. And you're going to hear a lot more about that on Wednesday. Another, I think, very important milestone is the fact that to this day there are still children suffering the consequences of the bleeding problem, and we're going to hear a lot more about that. And I actually want to make a very exciting announcement at this time, and that is thanks to someone by the name of Chuck Haymeyer, that for those of you who have attended either of the last 2 conferences, Chuck is an incredibly brilliant, talented attorney. Yes, I'm actually saying a compliment about an attorney, who is an amazing advocate for children with special needs. And Chuck has actually worked with us to develop a protocol, which is actually a legal document that enables you to leverage your treating physicians to make sure that they follow this protocol to protect your children. And so, of course, I asked Chuck in preparing this conference if he could make it to the conference to give another talk. And unfortunately, Chuck wasn't able to attend because he actually had a very huge trial coming up next week, and there's just no way that he could give up the time to prepare for that, to give a talk here at the conference and prepare for that trial. Well, I just got an email from Chuck this morning telling me that, quite to his pleasant surprise, that trial was settled, that case was settled over the weekend, and Chuck, through his own initiative, has graciously volunteered to come join us at the conference. And so the, once again, moving target of our conference schedule is going to change once again. Chuck has graciously agreed to speak on the last time slot, Thursday late afternoon. So I know it means Thursday is going to be a long day, but I think for those of you who have heard Chuck talk, he's actually absolutely an amazing person, and I think you'll find it to be an exhilarating talk. So Chuck has been instrumental to help us to adopt this protocol, which I can tell you can be life-saving for your children. So on Thursday, we're going to have a dedicated session as well for the fundraising efforts that many of you in this room have been involved with. I should take this time to say that unfortunately, Craig and Rebecca Thomas, who many of you know, who recently moved back to LA, were not able to make it to the conference tonight. I don't know how many of you have heard of the television show How I Met Your Mother, which just completed its 9th series and finished off with a bang. Craig and Rebecca have been nothing short of extraordinary in terms of their dedication to wanting to support 11Q. And so in November of 2011, they put together a fundraising event on a Saturday night on the set with all the actors there. And in one night, they raised almost $150,000 to help support my research. And I don't know, they're actually in Paris right now. I don't know if they're tuned in, but if you're out there, Craig and Rebecca, we love you guys. And knowing that the show is coming to an end this past year, they actually did it again this past November, and once again raised almost an identical amount of almost $150,000. So truly extraordinary. One of the things that I think never ceases to amaze me and to humble me is how much we continue to learn about Jacobson syndrome. And through a colleague of mine here at UCSD, he connected me with Ken Paris. They were at a meeting together, and if I'm remembering correctly, Ken will clarify this tomorrow. Ken had actually presented at a conference the fact that with the implementation of screening, newborn screening for children with immunodeficiency, several patients with Jacobson syndrome came up positive for having immune deficiency. And virtually right around this same time, as you'll see over there, there was a little infant or toddler who passed away tragically from a common cold virus called RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, and which altogether within a month really began to heighten my awareness of the possibility that children and potentially adults with Jacobson syndrome may have immunodeficiencies that even could put them in potentially life-threatening situations. And so at our last conference, Ken, again, like so many of the incredible speakers here, agreed to come on his own dime to give a talk on those initial findings that he shared with us. And what was supposed to be a 1-hour talk ended up being a 3-hour discussion as everyone chimed in about their own personal experiences of infections. And clearly it raised the issue that immunodeficiency is a major potential problem in your children. And around that same time, Virgil Dahm from Europe, from Holland, who will be joining us certainly by tomorrow, had actually met a family from Europe with Jacobson syndrome that was referred to him because of frequent infections, and that really piqued his interest as well. And so I think the beauty of this network is that Virgil and Ken came together and approached me, and together now I think we've sort of formed within the group a little mini consortium to formally begin to study this aspect of Jacobson syndrome. And here they are together in Germany. And again, stay tuned, because what you're going to hear tomorrow, I can tell you, will enormously impact your children, potentially with information that can be life-saving. So stay tuned for tomorrow's talks. Now, very recently, the Nobel Prize in 2012 was awarded to a British researcher, PhD, Dr. John Gurdon, who I remember learning about when I was in college, who actually showed that if you take the nucleus from a skin cell in a frog and transplant that into an egg cell in which that cell's nucleus has been removed, that transplanted nucleus from the skin cell still retain all of the information to allow that egg to develop into a normal frog, which means that nucleus in the skin cell retained its what we call pluripotency, its genetic potential to drive the development of a completely normal organism. Now, no one knew what the factors were that drove that, but it was an incredibly important observation. And then however many, 40 years later, Dr. Yamanaka, an investigator from Japan, was actually able to identify only 4 factors that are required to what we call reprogram a so-called differentiated cell, in this case a skin cell, into what we call a pluripotent stem cell. And that has enormous implications that we're going to talk about over the next couple of days, because what that means is that we can take a patient like your child, we can do a skin biopsy, that's why I'm telling you this now, and we can actually use this technology to reprogram those cells into basically any cell that you want from a patient with any potential disease or clinical phenotype. And in that way, we can actually recapitulate disease in a dish. And I'm going to tell you a lot more about that over the next couple of days. And so this was, I think, one of the more significant Nobel Prize awards that I can remember, because I think it's going to really revolutionize the way we study human disease. And for those of you that are going tomorrow for your skin biopsy, I can tell you that you are truly part of this cutting-edge technology that I think is unprecedented in its potential for not only studying human disease, but also with the potential to come up with new therapies. So I've just got a couple more slides, I think. Just this past winter, Dr. Matina's student, Dr. Ketty Parada, not only an MD, but spent 5 years working with Dr. Matina. Some of you have met her in the past. And Dr. Parada is the first person to have ever earned a PhD in Jacobson syndrome, and that was just awarded this past winter, which I think is quite an important feat. And then this past January, some of you I'm sure recognize this young man. Zion and actually Faith as well are the first two patients that we have now been able to successfully reprogram those skin biopsy cells that we got 2 years ago into these so-called induced pluripotent stem cells, which we are now in the process of redifferentiating or reprogramming into cells of interest in the various organs that are affected, namely heart and brain and others. And as I alluded to earlier, with the work of Natasha and Sarah, we just got our paper published or accepted for publication last month, describing our findings on your children, some of which have autism, and we've actually now identified a gene that we think is responsible, which I'll tell you about. I think this is my last slide, and up until 2 weeks ago, this was the kind of shape I was in, but obviously things have changed. All right, bad joke. So just to kind of summarize, until I got involved, and I'm not saying this for my own self-promotion, but there really wasn't a whole lot known about Jacobson syndrome. Only 12 papers had been published, and in the last 16 years there have been 76 papers published, and I've been very fortunate to be involved in 16 of those. I've been able to give now 60 lectures around the world on the subject, and again, none of this would be possible without all of you, and so I think as a result, I think we've really raised the awareness around the world of Jacobson syndrome. As you know, this is our 9th total, 8th conference here, well actually 7th conference in San Diego, there's one in Orlando. This is the 8th conference that I've been involved with. And initially when I got started, there were 3 investigators around the world studying Jacobson syndrome. I think now we have something like 9 or 10. And through various funding sources and philanthropy and fundraising efforts, we've been able to raise now about $1.5 million for research, which has certainly been instrumental in helping us to advance our findings. So I'm going to stop here, and again I want to say thanks to all of you and welcome to San Diego. I think it's going to continue to be an exciting few days.